Now going to question number 11, we always start with the prompt, and here it's asking us to effectively use data from the graph to complete the example. So what's the example? Let's start reading. These geographers surveyed small-scale farmers in 3 locations in Nigeria, which has mountainous terrain in the north, an urbanized center, and coastal terrain in the south, to learn more about their practices, like the types of crops they mainly cultivated. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops, and even constituted the majority of farmers who cultivated these crops. So, the big claim being made here is that female farmers were especially prominent in certain crops, even cultivating the majority of those crops. So now let's look at how the data would back up that idea. And on this graph, the y-axis is telling us the percent of female farmers that are a percent of the total number of farmers in 3 different regions. And so for the non-root vegetables, you can see that the female farmers are always very high up, always above at least, let's say, 45% of everything. So if the argument is that female farmers are more prominent growing certain types of crops, then I would say the black bar there is the one that supports this idea the most, because it's got the highest number of female farmers in every region. So let's look at the answer choices. A says most of the farmers who mainly cultivated cereals and non-root vegetables were women. I would say for non-root vegetables, which is the darkest bar that we mentioned, that would be true. But for cereals, no. For instance, right here, we have 30%, which is not going to be the majority. The majority is going to be more than 50%. So we can get rid of A. B, more women in this area mainly cultivated root crops than cereals. Well, that may or may not be true, but it doesn't really push the idea that women were especially prominent. It wasn't about comparing the women in one crop to the women in another. It was about saying that women did more of some crop than men. So we can get rid of B. C, most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. So this is good in a couple of ways, because even though the 3 non-root vegetable bars were the highest, this one was maybe not as high as the others. So answer choice C kind of focuses on the 2 that were really, really the highest, this one and this one. Most of the farmers who cultivate the non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo, ignoring Central Ondo, were women. So that's pretty good. And D, a relatively equal proportion of women across the 3 regions mainly cultivated cereals. Well, maybe this is equal, maybe it's not. But the point, like we said before, is that women were the majority. They constituted the majority of farmers who cultivated certain crops. And so just because the number may or may not be the same across the 3 regions, that does nothing to support the claim. So the answer here is C.